So thank you for joining us. It's the 11th annual Denver Startup Week. It's, I believe, the first one back and fully in person, so that's exciting. First, I'd like to thank the title sponsors. That'll be Amazon, Capital One Cafe, Double for Startups, and of course, Downtown Denver Partnership. This panel is part of the Maker Track, which is one of 8 tracks aimed at supporting the entire entrepreneurial team. The Maker Track is sponsored by Officescapes as well as Elements. By attending, you agree to the Code of Conduct for Denver Startup Week and also consent to being recorded or having your picture taken. So my name is Jake Harrington. I'll be hosting the panel. I'm the Program and Development Officer for LocalWorks, which is a nonprofit in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. This topic's important to me because I'm developing a makerspace in Wheat Ridge, Colorado that's yet to be named. So the goal of this panel is to flesh out what a makerspace is and to see how their utility extends past maybe the hobby realm and the kind of learning and dabbling realm and into something that is really, frankly, really powerful for entrepreneurs. So at the end of this panel, we will have a Q&A. So make sure to think of any questions, write them down, whatever you need to do, and we'll take Q&A by hands at the end. First question, has anyone used a makerspace? Okay, good amount of people. Has anyone used a makerspace for business development? Great. Yeah, all you people. Great. So throughout this panel, we'll talk about that, and we'll look at some ways to use a makerspace for business development that maybe you've used before, maybe you could use better, or maybe you don't even know about. So we'll just have our panelists introduce themselves, and we'll start at the end with Marissa.
My name's Marissa Miller. Welcome, everyone. I am currently excited to be here with you today talking about makerspaces. I've been involved with this particular makerspace for most of this year now, and makerspaces of the past is something I'm very passionate about. My background's in architecture. I have my master's in architecture, and so I very much operate in this cross-section of space and community and creative making. Happy to be here.
Great. Hey, my name's Zach Wilcock. I think I'm probably the corporate person on this panel. Started my career in the corporate world as an engineer. Left. I've done 3 startups. I'm back in the corporate world. All those startups have been out of makerspaces, either in Texas or here in Colorado. And I've also been sort of startup adjacent in a number of those makerspaces. So also glad to be here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sarush. My background is in the interactive science museum exhibit world. I've started a couple of different businesses in makerspaces, one of those being my first sort of exhibits that I got out into the world, and then the second is this consumer product that I have with me here today, sold on Amazon. And then last summer, I created a new makerspace in downtown Tucson that is specifically a space that's dedicated to supporting the growth stage startups that are working on hardware products.
Yeah, so as you can see, we're really lucky to have a lot of knowledge here. For my first question, we'll just level set and start. A lot of us have seen makerspaces maybe in schools or libraries, and you see a 3D printer or some craft materials and supplies, things like that. There's a lot of different forms. So I wanted to ask each and every one of you, how do you define a makerspace?
Oh, me first again? That seems unfair.
We'll go the other way next time.
I define a makerspace as a community, first and foremost. This is a collection of knowledge and resource from experience and sharing with your fellow makers in a community, facilitated by something like a makerspace where there is intentional collection of resources and tools for really unlocking the possibility of whatever somebody has imagined to create, enabling them to create it and expand it to hopefully support their endeavors in life. Like, that's the end goal is, I have this idea, let me bring it forth into the world. I think community really is the conduit that makes that possible, and that's ultimately, for me, what makerspaces boil down to.
I think what I'd add to that is I showed up in a makerspace for the tools, and that drew me there. I didn't know how to weld. I was sort of enticed by a 3D printer, wanted to learn how to, cam and do some stuff on CNC. And I think that's something that's a lot of people think about as the makerspace. I think it's what a lot of makerspaces do well is they have tools and equipment. But I think actually without the community element, you're just going to have basically a room full of tools and varying states of maintenance. I think that's something that makerspaces need to evolve beyond. It's not just about providing tools and maybe a little bit of training, but actually that broader community that could foster a startup, perhaps.
And one of the resources you'll find in a makerspace, which isn't often talked about, are the retired folks that are really bored and have these areas of expertise that they're, very excited to be sharing with, new business owners and people that are doing things for fun and for hobbies. The makerspace is a place where you can really build anything. There's the tools, the equipment, and the community that can support you in building. Let's say that you went to the hospital and you needed to get an MRI for your hand. It was too expensive. There was a guy in my local hometown makerspace who built his own MRI machine to image himself because he didn't want to go to a hospital. There was somebody building a custom guitar. There were other people that were developing custom scientific instruments. There were people that were developing custom speaker equipment. I mean, the possibilities are really endless.
Right. So off the heels of all those great examples, and I'll bring it right back to you. How has a makerspace personally enabled a venture of yours?
Well, the very first museum exhibit that I built was made in a makerspace, and they had all of the tools and the equipment that I needed in order to make a professional grade museum exhibit that could then be taken out into the world and actually get sold. This Micro Safari product as well is made from a bunch of parts that are commonly found to be made in the tools in the makerspace. So laser cut foam for the insert and the packaging. This little disc here is laser cut acrylic, and everything else is just off the shelf parts. So it's the ventures that I've done are an amalgamation of off the shelf parts and custom things made with equipment that you can find in a makerspace. Yeah,
I think sort of building on that, I showed up for the laser cutter and the 3D printer and have started businesses based out of both of those. What I think was unexpected was all the other things that I learned while I was there that made that idea better or the experience a little bit richer. And so again, going back to the idea of community, the makerspace is, hopefully provides functional tools, but it's going to provide a community that challenges you to go further and inspire you in ways you would have never expected.
To piggyback on that, that idea of expansion or being pushed beyond, if I brought my concept, my prototype, my idea being built in one software that I'm familiar with, say SketchUp, that some of you might be familiar with as an accessible way to build and prototype something out, coming to a makerspace and proofing out that idea and trying and failing as I build it, somebody else can introduce me to other CAM 3D printing software that I may not be as more in the arts realm or the handcrafted realm as experienced with the technology side, and they say, look, I know how you can solve your handcrafted problem way easier with a machining or a printing solution. Let me show you how. So
can I keep going? I think the network is something that is difficult to overstate. I showed up to learn, very basic things, and eventually got connected with the community. And I distinctly remember one day talking to the startup that was on the bench next to me, and they were starting to outgrow the makerspace. And there's this whole other world of, offline professional makerspaces, and they were ready to go somewhere higher grade. But all those larger spaces have a foot or a perch in some of these public maker spaces, and just making those connections so that they can graduate to the next place, to the right facility for where their product's taking them. That's something that you would never know about all these other spaces had you not participated in the makerspace. Just got started.
And the Launch Lab makerspace that I built was exactly that. It was more of a professional grade makerspace, which wasn't actually open to the public, but you would find out about it by going to the public maker spaces, and then hear about it by word of mouth and apply to our program in that as well. And speaking on the connections that you can make in a makerspace, I ended up selling one of my exhibits because I just had it set up at a makerspace that a person from a museum happened to be walking through and getting a tour of the makerspace, saw the thing, and then made the connections for me and ended up selling it to a nature center museum.
Right, yeah, it's good to remember that, the people that would go to a makerspace even kind of as a hobby or at the end of their day are people that they're coming to use 3D printers and do computer design or whatever. They're usually pretty interested folks and pretty high performing folks, so they're good to know. Real quick, Suresh, how if you could put a dollar value on the off the shelf, if you were to buy all the tools you used off the shelf to develop your Micro Safari, what would you put that at?
So, I mean, these days, knowing what I know, so the laser cutter is the most expensive machine that I use to make this thing. I know a lot about laser cutters, so I would be able to buy an import laser cutter direct from China that I have to assemble and build myself and sort of know the ins and outs and okay, how do you go in the back of the machine and hook up the high voltage wiring and whatnot. If you were to buy it sort of pre-made and just ready to use, you'd be looking at about $20,000 or so starting price. For a bed size of what I ended up using for production, you'd be looking at probably about 40 grand, something like that.
So yeah, makerspaces oftentimes are under $100 a month. So if you do the math, that's pretty in your favor. Yeah, I mean, we started to touch on this with Zach. You touched on that with some of the knowledge, so I'll bring this to you. What are some of the underutilized, undervalued, underrated aspects of a makerspace or programs that makerspaces provide that maybe the layperson or someone that's not as initiated may not know about that would help with a business venture?
Yeah, I think one thing that, again, you wouldn't think of is just getting the vocabulary to describe what you're trying to do. I knew that I wanted to learn CAD, but the makerspace I went to was a Fusion 360 shop, and they're like, look, dude, you get your laptop, you get a second monitor, you download Fusion 360 for free, and you watch this guy on YouTube, and in 4 hours, you're gonna know everything. You watch him do it, you do it, and then within 4 hours, you've learned CAD. And that, the amount of time, that seems really simple and straightforward, but in 4 hours, I'd sort of was able to learn everything I needed to know. But without that primer of someone pointing you in the right direction, it's like, hey, here's how you get started for free. I don't know how much time or money I would have wasted. I probably would have taken a semester-long class at a community college and then bought a SolidWorks license and be $10,000 poorer before it.
So for those that don't know the lingo, what is CAD?
Computer-aided design.
It's basically the software that you use to make the designs that you can then take and 3D print it, laser cut it, turn it into a physical object.
Yeah.
Great. So we've had some pretty technical talk. I think a lot of people would immediately dismiss the makerspace if they didn't have a physical product they're developing. And I think a lot of the startup scene in Denver is non-physical products, softwares, et cetera. If I was developing or had an idea for a non-physical product, is the makerspace a place I could use to grow my venture or at any step of the way?
I'll take that one. Yeah, I would say absolutely, because as we've seen, a maker come from any walk of life. If you have an app idea, you're still going to need to do the marketing, maybe the branding for that app idea. You might be doing community events to collect feedback on what your direction on your idea or venture is. And a makerspace can help with all of that, whether it's that enabling you to have access to the tools, to all these other spheres of development that go along with actually inventing a non-product, or if it's getting access to, going back to the people and the knowledge, being able to ask questions, check your standing and your understanding where you are in your process, because linear thought is the death of all of our innovation. We want those external check-ins on our thinking to make sure we're not missing something. So I think it's invaluable.
I mean, to put it in very concrete terms, I've sold a startup to someone I met in one of these offline makerspaces that I met here 5 years ago. And that was not a product-based startup, so that'd be a good reason.
And we're seeing more and more now that new makerspaces are getting opened up that are also including videography equipment. They're including camera equipment, especially at university makerspaces. I've been seeing them, build entire rooms that are, huge green screen walls that have the sort of infinity edges to them, which is, very expensive to do. At Launch Lab, we essentially had this idea where we wanted to create a space that you could build, make, and then share your creation, right? And that sharing part is, of course, very important to actually selling a product or a non-physical product as well. And then you also have a lot of makerspaces that have computers with licenses for softwares that are expensive, which you may only need to use for 10 minutes. If you have to do one really fast thing in Photoshop, you don't want to have to get an entire Creative Cloud license to be able to do that sort of a thing.
Subscription-based services being the death of all instantaneous innovation.
That's right. Yeah, it's all about, the elimination of overhead can extend to the software. It's not just physical laser cutters and whatnot. Because, like Marissa said, everything's expensive and you can't own it. So.
And I actually have one more thing to add to that.
Yeah, please.
So there's a lot of overlap between, there's this other term called a hacker space, which is loosely related to a maker space. It's essentially a space where there's a lot more software that's involved. And so usually you'll find these people that are involved in software in maker spaces, and you'll find people that are involved in physical products at a hacker space. So, you can meet more than just physical product people at a maker space or a hacker space.
Yeah, that's actually, so the quick history lesson regarding hacker spaces is that's actually the first, those were the original maker spaces basically. So that term popped up some 50 years ago in Germany. There's I can't remember the name, but there's a group of hackers that got together and basically took all their, computer parts into one room and just like we said, had a community, and it was much more underground at that point, and that's really grown. They're the longest running group of hackers, and it's the longest running makerspace, if you could call it that, or hackerspace to this day. So yeah, an example of a hackerspace here is they've branched out, but Den Hack, and right next door is a group of people who are really, really intelligent, and a lot of their intelligence lies in software as well as hardware. So there's a lot of different flavors of makerspaces and hackerspaces. So yeah, there's something for everyone. Makerspaces. So with COVID, they definitely took a hit, right? A lot of people weren't meeting. The search terms for makerspaces took a pretty big dip, and they've just now returning to pre-COVID levels. We've seen some makerspaces go under here in Denver and kind of across the country. But like I said, it's growing still, and I wanted to ask, what does the future of makerspaces look like to you guys? What do you anticipate, or what might you want to see moving forward?
I think the makerspace, needs to continue to evolve. I think it has evolved a lot already, but I think, makerspaces that move, having the tools is great, but focus on the success of the people that are in there would be really helpful. I think that the community, the networking, and I think there's a big opportunity for makerspaces and incubators to start to merge. So if you're really interested in a startup, you're probably going to need, the thing you're missing probably isn't just a 3D printer or a laser cutter. It's going to be that whole environment, a little bit of legal, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of SEO or something. And that is something that I think you'll start to see co-working space, makerspace, and incubator start to come together. I think a lot of people are exploring that already. I don't think there's a perfect solution, but I think that's really interesting sort of evolution that's I hope to see. Also, I think we need more makerspaces in Denver, so we don't have to drive to Longmont.
Definitely. And that's the next logical step is, of course, turning makerspaces into a more well-rounded community resource, for businesses that involve startup incubators, what have you. And we're seeing this trend begin to happen right now. Makerspaces are getting picked up by the institutional level right now. We're seeing a lot of universities that are creating brand new makerspaces. And in fact, I know several people, I suppose including myself, that ended up getting poached from a public community makerspace to go and build a much more substantial professional makerspace at a university. In fact, my hometown, the director of that makerspace got poached by the University of San Diego to now go build a giant, multi-million-dollar makerspace when, we just had $50,000 of tools, and now these universities can put so much more funding into it and really create something brand new, give access to more resources that we haven't been able to see before.
I think one thing is also worthwhile that many people may not be aware is a lot of companies are building their own makerspaces, and these corporate makerspaces, I think they're, the nonprofit makerspaces have real problems. The corporate ones, I think, are generally doing worse. They've got professional staff and they got great equipment and beautiful spaces, and they're not leading to like the next generation or evolution in opportunity or revenue centers for these companies. And I think there's also an opportunity there for that corporate money and their dream of having a makerspace that briefs really well and demos really well, and actually combining it with people who are actually going to use it to unlock value. I think there's a lot of, I know there's low-hanging fruit there, but that gap can't continue to exist because companies will stop funding those.
To tie all this together, I think there are really good points of makerspaces as a program exists in a very nebulous space between institutional, civic, private, and the future of them, I think, is really left up to the communities and leaders that are driving them, because I think they exist in this space that's really powerful as our society starts to return back to a craft and enabled and a self-educated. And I want to spend time in my backyard, not working 70 hours a week at the grindstone, learning and honing my craft and that Renaissance man ideology. As we return to that, the makerspace position in between all these realms of municipalities and education and retirement communities, they have, I don't want to say a responsibility, but I mean that, to be the conduit of opportunity to connect their makers, their individuals coming to this community space, to business opportunities, to knowledge that builds their base, their structure, their life, that is always working towards that expansion and enablement and self-sufficiency that connects us with our own lives and not just being connected of when's my next meeting.
I should also add on to this question that although we're seeing more corporate makerspaces and more institutional makerspaces, these don't necessarily replace community makerspaces. You sort of run into this problem when you go to these sort of professional institutional makerspaces where you're not allowed to do a lot of stuff that you would typically be able to get away with in a typical makerspace. So if you need to, build a cast metal part, you could just go in the backyard of a community makerspace and just like do it quietly and nobody sees it. In an institutional setting, you would need to, go for several months through a process to be able to be allowed to do these sort of things. So I think there's a lot of innovation that gets to happen behind watching eyes at a community makerspace.
Yeah, no, I think there's, think about a continuum where I have this, I've got a great shop at home, I can do whatever I want, but only one person or a few people have access to it, to the community makerspace, and then back to the corporate or institutional makerspace where, again, very few people have access to this wonderful space. That community makerspace is that interesting intersection where you have a lot of tools and a lot of access, and that's very distinct from, your home shop and also these corporate makerspaces or academic makerspaces.
Right, yeah, it's an analogy might not work for everyone, but it's kind of like gyms where you've got the Planet Fitness. Right. It's accessible, it's cheap, but the lunk alarm's going to go off on you if you do something crazy. And then you've got groups of people that'll just combine supplies in some basement somewhere and do what they want to do. So, there's a large variety. I have a question for Marissa, and then everyone else can chime in too, but do maker spaces need to look different for artists or creative types in that kind of endeavor?
Do they need to look different? When I hear you ask "look different," do they need to be more approachable than maybe these high-tech, super shiny maker spaces? I think possibly yes, because artists in the maker sphere tend to be very messy, right? And I'm personally a ceramic artist. I'm not going to be throwing pots next to the laser or the 3D printer. That's just programmatically a bad idea. I think these well-funded institutions will have considered the multitude of making and understand, printmaking is over here, welding is out here, contained. Every making type has a need. And I think artists will understand that not every space will be able to serve their specific needs. So if an artist needs a highly controlled environment, maybe they're an audiovisual artist, they'll be very at home in a high-tech, clean, controlled maker space. But someone who's slinging clay will know to tread lightly.
I have a very distinct memory of visiting a art lab at a university, and the students were making sculptures and were so poor that one of them had cut down the street light in front of the lab and twisted it up into a sculpture. And I contrast that with every other makerspace I've been into where people just start dropping off stuff all the time. And so it's like, if you're an artist and you can't afford supplies, which I can totally understand, yeah, I feel like the makerspaces are uniquely positioned because people are constantly dropping junk off. And I was like, man, we should just be moving all the junk that the makerspace didn't actually want or ask for and bringing it over to like the art school and like, hey, don't need to cut down the streetlights anymore. You can just, there's all this stuff.
Upcycling for artists is very in right now.
Yeah, I think and makerspaces could play a big role in that because I think you're quickly acquiring a lot of stuff and you don't even have a makerspace yet.
Yep. You need a donation policy.
Right.
Yeah, if you ever need access to, I don't know, a bag of 10,000 resistors to make like a resistor sculpture out of, go to the basement of a makerspace. I guarantee you'll find some random junk that you can make cool stuff out of. So at Launch Lab, which was built for professional startups, we of course had to make the decision to not include, pottery wheels and to include glass blowing and whatnot because, how many startups are actually doing that kind of stuff? Turns out only a couple. But you could then go down the street to the community makerspace where they had access to all these tools. So I think that if you're an artist that's looking for sort of more handmade, artisanal tools, you should go to a community makerspace. If you are a type of artist that is using technology to make your art, for example, if you're making laser cut earrings or you're making 3D printed earrings, let's say, you could go to one of these makerspaces that's built for sort of the professional startups because they will have those tools that you need to fulfill your craft.
Right, yeah, even if you're an artist going into more traditional makerspace, if you have more options to render material, basically, you can do that. There's like ceramic 3D printing and all sorts of stuff. So, and then there's a whole world of digital artists that are sculpting in 3D and Blender or whatnot, and all of a sudden have a 3D printer or something, or a CNC in a way to make that a physical product. Let's see. So
I actually have a question I'd like to ask for the panel.
Yes.
What are some examples of really interesting random junk or interesting obscure tools that you've seen in a makerspace that got donated?
I think every makerspace I've been to has oddly had a reflow oven, which is like how you like solder, surface mount components onto a circuit board, like at production scale. And like, where the hell is this stuff coming from? Like, who's got reflow ovens lying around?
Someone who had it and then was told to get rid of it by a wife or something, or husband. Yeah. Yes, that's often the case.
I think the other thing I saw that's crazy was, like a 15-foot tall, 6-axis automotive grade welding robot one of those arms that reaches in, and it was powered up and not in a cage like they're meant to be, and it was real.
At my last space, I was helping manage. We were mostly a ceramic art space. We were a gallery as well for the community. And one of the construction projects in the community was renovating this old church, and they had lost this big stained glass window in the renovations, and somebody in the community knew to connect us because we had a bunch of fused glass art programming for kids. They could come in and make their artwork and fuse it into their own stained glass. And we got 8 or 9 55 drum barrels of stained glass that we then sorted and were able to upcycle into both the pottery studio and the fused glass programming and offer up to artists in the community to be like, we have 55 gallons of beautiful blue original stained glass. Come at it.
I feel like you've got.
I have a couple.
Yeah.
Go for it. Yeah.
All right, so at ZeroCraft, my hometown makerspace, we got donated. So in the basement, there was a cage of these super exquisite looking microscopes. It turned out we had $600,000 or $700,000 original retail price microscopes, like research grade, super high end, from a local medical device manufacturing company that had some failed research project they needed to get a tax write-off. So they just donated all these super crazy microscopes. And I'm talking like everything on the microscope was automated. There was a touch screen on it, and you could just press buttons to change the objectives and move everything around with motors. And the makerspace was like trying to get rid of these things because they're so specialty. It's like, okay, they're just taking up space in the basement and not getting used. And then we had, giant robot arms hanging around. We had a pick and place machine that got donated by an electronics recycler. There were many people that would go scavenge the dumpsters at the university to find sort of like really high-end vacuum fittings that, is like a little metal part that will cost thousands of dollars because it's rated to, research grade specs to be used on, spacecraft and whatnot. They would have specialty tapes that you could not find anywhere else, and like you couldn't even call the manufacturer to get them because you didn't have like university credentials. So if you want to go dumpster diving for cool stuff, check out universities that have research going on.
Yeah, running a makerspace, you get crazy stuff donated, or you have crazy stuff, and then people ask you for even more insane tools, like if you have them or not. And I think the most beautiful moment is when someone asks if you have like a 5-gallon ultrasonic cleaner, and you do. And that's always a nice moment. Let's open it up. We got a little bit more time, so let's open up. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
One, do you consider, say, forges and places like that maker spaces or specialty spaces? Because in some cases, I think they would be considered maker spaces if there would be a way to apply that. And then the other question I had is, do you see any issues with IP with maker spaces? That would be my main concern.
So I feel like forging aluminum is reasonably common in makerspaces. And I know that Tinkerbell in Longmont bought, they have a pretty brisk sword making practice, and they have this massive automated hammer that they were just standing up recently. So I feel like that is common. I think you'll see a lot less steel forging and stuff like that. But I'll pause there before we go to the IP question. Sorry, I'm pointing this at you.
Would you consider it a makerspace though, for like a steel forge, for actually doing steel and forging sword, where they do a lot of metallurgy, just metallurgy, not 3D printing, not laser cutting, not all the other stuff?
I think I think it's rare, but if you have a forge, you should definitely call it a makerspace and invite people to come join. I think that would be really. It'd be rare, but I think it would be really interesting.
Yeah. I would agree. Just to make it inclusive, I would encourage the use of call it a makerspace or specialties forging, and you may have, fringe artisans saying, well, have you considered adding this to the space? And if that's considered, then absolutely, that's a makerspace because it's community informed and it grows based on the needs and wants of what it serves.
Well, also like the upcycling and recycling. If you're forging and someone drops off a crappy warped table saw, bring it over to your place and we melt it down.
And I've seen a couple of makerspaces that have had blacksmithing tools and equipment there, and then also specialty spaces that are dedicated to blacksmithing, and they have even more specialty blacksmithing equipment. Would I call it a makerspace? Sure. I mean, I would call a hackerspace a type of makerspace. I think that a makerspace is a very general term for a lot of these community spaces that have access to tools and equipment to do specialty things. I don't remember what I was going to say. IP question?
Yeah, go IP.
I will take this one. So I built a product that had, a lot of IP involved in it at a makerspace. I, just make sure not to show someone, as exciting as it is to be like, when somebody asks you, oh, what are you working on? To tell them all about what you're doing. I would say just, don't reveal trade secrets. That's how I ended up doing it. As far as, I guess is your question, like, does the makerspace then own rights to?
No, more so is there precautions in place that basically if you come to a makerspace and your colleague here is making a new thing to cure cancer and they're working on it right next to you, right? You can't, oh man, that's kind of cool. That's kind of cool. Is there something in place to protect the rights of makers in the space for their IP that they're currently working on, even if they don't talk about it?
Yeah, so I know that some of the actual professional makerspaces that are at universities and incubators and whatnot, they have in their terms and conditions that the university does not own any IP that comes out of the makerspace. As far as getting protection for what you're doing, if you are going to one of the more professional makerspaces and you requested, hey, I'm working on something very specialty, like, is there a way that we could arrange that I, have a reserved time on this tool or equipment where there's not going to be someone else in the space? We definitely would have accommodated that sort of thing. In a community makerspace, I would say it's, up to you to sort of protect yourself. It's more of a Wild West makerspace in that sort of situation.
Yeah, I would say the community makerspaces are not interested one way or the other, and so they're not going to offer you any protection. They're not going to be interested in your IP either, and so it would come back down to like IP best practices. So don't work on it in front of someone else unless you have paper with them already. But then a lot of makerspaces will offer private rooms, and I think you would have a reasonable expectation that, unless you invited someone to that room, that your IP would be protected in that space. But I don't think you don't have any recourse. You're not going to be able to sue a community makerspace for, unless you want a bunch of laser cutters. So.
When you were working on your product, did you get it registered with the Library of Congress right up front with the little addendum so that you can make changes along the way to get yourself protected right out of the gate?
So are you referring to patents or copyright in this case?
Like as far as the designs and the text names, stuff like that.
Yeah, so I think the answer to this question goes a little bit into my philosophy about IP protection as far as the products that I've previously worked on. What I've come to learn is that, at least for the products that I worked on, the value in the product was really in the execution and honestly more of the sales side of it than actually building the cool product itself. And I think that there are many ways to protect your IP, and I am personally of the opinion that a combination of trade secrets and strategic positioning is the best way to protect yourself. The problem with just relying on copyright, trademark, and patents is that if somebody rips you off, you have to fight them, which is incredibly expensive, and startups are not necessarily going to be able to do that. So a better method is just to make it so that nobody can steal your IP in the first place one way or another, and I think there are many ways to do that depending on what your product actually is.
I think one other thing I'll add, when you patent or protect something and you get into a fight, there's a good chance that the person fighting you will try to invalidate your patent, and so which really just comes down to money. So if they're bigger than you, you may have a patent, but they may just instead of like fighting you directly, they may just get your patent invalidated. which is, it's a pretty nasty world out there. So I'm aligned with Sarush. Trade secrets is often a good way to go. When you file a patent, you have to disclose, you have to teach them how to make it, and that gives them just about everything they need to do. They need to invalidate it down the road if it gets ugly.
Invalidate it or create a workaround for it now that they have, the knowledge of how you made it.
Right.
I have a project in mind for a wearable, and I'm curious if you have suggestions for what a good makerspace is for that sort of concept.
And you say a wearable?
Wearable, yeah.
I think I've been really impressed with Tinkermill in that area. They're, not knowing what your product is, but like if you need to work with something flexible, like their fabric shop is very well stocked, very well staffed. They do a great job.
Do they do classes up there?
Absolutely, yeah.
Or if you're, making flexible parts, you would also want to potentially look into a resin 3D printer. So those Formlabs printers, as an example, Tinkermill has a room dedicated to those types of printers. You're also going to want to, be doing very small SMD soldering work, which you would probably need a stereo microscope to be able to accomplish. I believe that Tinkermill has that as well.
Yeah, could be. I'm not sure.
I would be very surprised if they don't have the capability to do that. Tinkermill is really quite extensive in their capabilities.
Where are they?
They're up in Longmont, unfortunately.
Long Tucky.
Den Hack is also an option. They have less programming in classes, but there's, from a knowledge base standpoint, there's a lot of electrical engineers, folks like that, and electronics equipment and whatnot. And when you have that, they started as hackerspace, so that's kind of the things people brought in. So you'll get a lot of electrical testing, all that good stuff as well, especially if you're in the Denver area. Put in for that as a suggestion as well.
Does Den Hack have classes?
They do not, but you could probably seek advice, in an appropriate manner. But yeah, Tinkermill is really the best in Colorado at the moment, and from a programming and capability standpoint, it's just in Longwood, which is a lot of people's biggest problem.
I will say check out Denver Tool Library if you're looking for some classes. They have a lot of great intro into if wearables like a metal cuff. Denver Tool Library. They have a lot of great classes.
With respect to Tinkermill being up in Longmont, which is about an hour away, how come there isn't a more local makerspace that is like on the Tinkermill level? I think this is more.
Yeah, Jake.
Yeah, Jake.
I'm trying to fix that. Yeah, that's how I ended up working for LocalWorks is I was living in Evergreen at the time, and I was looking, excuse me. I was looking for maker spaces near me, right? And I just happened upon the meetup for the volunteers for this group. Started as a volunteer, and now I was a mechanical engineer in aerospace, and I work for a nonprofit. So, so that's what we're working on, right? So we're in the development phase. We don't have a membership, but we're hoping to get to that point kind of early next year. And like I said, there's Den Hack. There's a place called Gizmo Dojo, which is very grassroots. There's a lot of smaller maker spaces. We're lucky to have some more top-down funding, so we're hoping to get to that level where we are really fleshed out really quickly and can offer a cheap membership and programming. So to answer your question why there isn't, not sure.
It's hard. It's hard to do. There've been a lot that have tried and failed. Like, if you're looking to make $1 million, this is opening a makerspace is not how you do it. But I think Jake's also being humble. What's I think is unique about what Jake and LocalWorks is doing is Jake works for LocalWorks. LocalWorks is part of Wheat Rage. So this is a municipality that's taking this approach, and so you're going to get a lot more government support, like local municipal government, which I think is really exciting. And I think it's going to pay big dividends. I think that's an unusual model. Generally, it's people ganging together with their tools and trying to offer classes to cover some of their operating costs. And this is a very different model, which I think is worth exploring.
Right. We're hoping to meet in the, we had the discussion of the corporate makerspaces and the grassroots. And I started my first makerspace experience was working at the Innovation Studio, which is a makerspace at Ohio State. Basically, someone gave us like $1 million and just told us to make a makerspace. So I've been in that world of the corporate top down. You get people's agendas, you get a lot of money, but you can't cut a hole in your window to vent your laser cutter. It really is limiting. And then I was a member of some grassroots stuff where we were talking about like giving the materials to artists. Like you could have given artists enough broken 3D printers from that place to make a sculpture. Like and everything was broken, and it's good if you want to go in and fix some stuff and whatever, but it's hard to make stuff there. So we're trying to meet in the middle, and we're hoping to get some grants and have that legacy and history, and bring in some top-down funding, but still be community-based, and we have a volunteer base. We are a nonprofit, so we're trying to hit that middle ground as well. Yes, you in a gray shirt here?
So
Yeah.
I'm from even further than Tinkerbell. I'm in Loveland, so I'm in the Loveland Creative Space. So
Oh, okay.
Same thing you all presented.
Yeah.
You all touched on it earlier, but the community aspect and the education piece, I think, is critical where a lot of them fall off. And we personally do as well. We don't do a good job. We have a space, we have the tools, but to your point, without the community, without that sharing of knowledge, it really doesn't get the flywheel going and then create that kind of like sustainable growth that I think is really kind of been the secret sauce for Tinkerbell. And you just see their membership has just gone up over time, and they really do a good job of creating educational opportunities, facilitating people learning how to use the stuff that's there. So that's for anyone getting involved in makerspace. I mean, that's for me, my 2 cents. Really important. From the topic of makerspace as a tool for small businesses and startups, a lot of makerspaces tend to rent out space within the space. So you have cubicles, you have offices, things like that, to individuals or entities that are trying to get off the ground. And I've seen conflict created between your hobbyist and your business entities competing over what is finite resources, right? Machine time, access to equipment, materials, whatever. How do you see that playing out? And do you see that something where you want to limit the amount of space and or time that you have these entities in there? Do you want to give them like a rent period where, hey, come in, you're here for a year, and then you're either growing out and going into your own space, or that space gets opened up for someone else? Because what we've experienced is we have a lot of people that kind of just plant roots. They get that space and then they just don't leave. Right? They may or may not be contributing to the growth and development of the space and the community. So, long-winded question, but how do you see the relationship between the space and entities that we're trying to support from small business startup perspective?
I'll take this one. So I believe the right answer is to create 2 dedicated spaces, and it, I think, works out well for both parties, where now, of course, you don't have the hobbyists and the businesses competing with each other anymore, but also the needs are very different for the 2 parties. And so that's why we built out Launch Lab, was that we saw that businesses were trying to use the hobby makerspace, and they were really struggling because things were broken. They were competing with people doing hobby stuff. And so we created this space where they could reserve specific times on things. They could have the space to themselves if they needed it. And they also got other supplemental support as well. So that's the answer I think is right. But if that's not an option, I honestly don't know what the right thing to do is.
I think an area where makerspaces struggle is they don't have professional full-time staff, and that sort of compounds a lot of these issues. Places where I've seen it work well is where you have full-time staff, so machines aren't broken, and then if staff sees an Etsy company dominating, running 60 hours a week on a laser cutter, they can step in, whether there's a policy for it or not, or they can be there to identify hey, we have a lot of demand for the laser cutters. What happens if we get more? So it always comes back to money. Being able to afford full-time staff is a real luxury. But I think Tinkerbell's traditionally run with one full-time person. But that is a lot more than a lot of makerspaces have is one, the makerspace I was at in Texas had 10 full-time staff. You could call a 20-ton forklift and have it there in 15 minutes, and someone would roll up and unload your 18-wheeler for you. Like, it was a great service, and companies loved it. And it was the only makerspace I've ever seen where you'd come in one day and 2 of the 3 laser cutters would be down, and you come in the next day and all of a sudden they're all up and running again. It was just made everyone a lot happier.
So I'll actually take the opposite stance to Sarush. And neither, I think, is wrong. Again, I think it comes down to the community and the members that are using it. But I think it's important to try to commingle those energies to some extent for that sake of community. I think this is something that the art gym does well on East Colfax, and they have full-time staff for both weekday and evening and weekend. They're not 24/7 access, but their model's very similar to maker spaces. And there is, I think, a natural turnover or maybe an expectation that could be put upon the production or the corporate or the Etsy shop you take up a lot of space and energy, people, to business hours, and then there's a natural turnover to where the hobbyists can come in where they're naturally inclined more in the evenings or the weekends. And having that kind of social contract of conscientiousness to others using the space, and like that corporate leftovers in the fridge policy of like, if it's left out, it's getting tossed on Friday. Having that natural turnover that every week it's reset and there's a flow between these people that are using it for their business and the hobbyists that are using it to hone their craft and learn. And if the facility is well funded enough and lucky enough to programmatically design that to where the business people can take respite away and have office space or cubicle or storage space, but still be engaged with the hobbyist space, I think that's best. But of course, time, resources, privilege of space, it's all as the stars align.
And I am going to backpedal a little bit and agree actually that commingling is a very powerful thing, but there needs to be a balance there. And at Launch Lab, we did identify that was something we didn't want to have happen, was to totally separate these two makerspaces. And so that's why we maintain a very strong relationship with the local community makerspace, and we essentially would be sending a lot of people back and forth between the two spaces and be co-presenting lessons and teaching people how to use tools and whatnot, where we would host stuff at their space, they would host stuff at ours. And I think that it is very important to commingle. How you actually do that is sort of up to interpretation.
Yeah, you can definitely take different philosophies. It's almost like governance, where like I've seen a makerspace get taken over by someone with the resources, where they had their project going, they're working on an aerospace startup, and they took over the space basically. I mean, the makerspace was about to go under, and they started taking over some of the rent. And from there, it was their space that you're allowed to use, right? So you have to you have to be in charge of your space as a makerspace owner, and you can't let the businesses run you. A lot of times they'll bring in the resources, they'll bring in their tools and let other people use them, or they'll improve the space for people, but you have to keep the makerspace neutral. But yeah, you can let it run free, you can separate them. There's a lot of different strategies that may work in different ways. We're coming up on 5 minutes left, so being respectful of your time, do you guys have any closing remarks or one last question? Oh, you've been raising your hand this whole time, so you want to ask a quick question?
So, if you're interested in starting a makerspace, two-part question. Are
Yes.
there any good resources? And then second question, when you decide to make one, what kind of research do you do within the community to determine the need? Because right now, I know I want one because I just want one.
Right.
But I know there needs to be a lot more than that.
Yes.
Yeah, don't do it first. I think it is real. I would encourage you to explore some of the other maker spaces and understand what they're doing well. I think if I were to sum it up, a couple things. Maker spaces generally focus on the the tooling or the technology, and less so on the people and the process. And to get something done, you need people, process, technology. That's a holy trinity. So think about a lot like what you would be doing differently. And I think there's opportunity there, but these things generally fail. So it's difficult to do it right. So I would ask yourself, what am I doing differently that I think will give it opportunity? And I think it's where Jake is set up for success. He's taking an interesting approach of working with the municipality to bring this to life. And I think that's might be a new model that might work. I'm really excited for Jake.
And as far as the market research side to see if a community actually needs a makerspace, go to the next closest makerspaces and talk to some of the people there. And if it's 50% of the people in Longmont drove up from Denver to use Tinkermill, we probably need a makerspace of our own in Denver.
Yeah.
Do check out your libraries, because I think as we enter a new technology-centric society, they are making a concerted effort to take public-funded money and channel it into technology enablement, where software and things like 3D printing and laser cutting are accessible at a community level. If that makerspace hole exists in your community, like many of ours.
Yeah. And yeah, there's a fork in your road really early of nonprofit or for-profit, and I would look at different examples of each. They're usually on their website, but you'll notice. I mean, so Tinkermill is a great example of a nonprofit makerspace. The Idea Foundry in Columbus, Ohio, is one of the largest for-profit makerspaces, and you'll see right away in their structure and their price structure that it is like very different. I mean, you're talking hundreds of dollars of difference per month, and in classes and certifications, and you're paying for time, and just on startup, you need a lot of capital to start a makerspace in general, or you can do it slowly. It's kind of, you choose which one. But yeah, it's about at the hour, so I'd love to grab any closing remarks from you guys. Anything you're dying to say before we have the audience?
I guess I'll go first.
Support makerspaces.
I'll share. I love Denver Startup Week. I've been here for 5 years. 5 years ago, I was sitting out there. I understand it's exciting, but it can also be a stressful time. There are a lot of people in this room that are thinking about pivoting their career, doing something else, maybe looking for a job. And 5 years ago, I'd moved here. I had a 3-month-old kid. I didn't have a job. And I think Denver is a target-rich environment. I think Denver is really a great place to start your own business. A lot of people move here for the lifestyle. The Denver lifestyle is not the startup lifestyle. So if you're willing to work hard, there's a lot of opportunity here. And so I'm sympathetic to a lot of people that are out here who might be thinking about pivoting or looking for a job. I was literally there 5 years ago, and it worked out really well. So I think it's a lot of reasons to be hopeful.
And if you haven't been to a makerspace yet, go check one out, take a class, meet some people. Maybe you'll find some new hobby. Maybe you'll find something new for your business that you've not considered before. I've seen that happen multiple times. So,
right. I think one of the big threads is you get, you can get out of a makerspace what you put into it, especially from the community is such an important part, and it's the part people miss. And if you go in there and offer up advice and receive advice and be curious, you'll never know who you'll meet, what you'll connect with. And, it's a great breeding ground for creativity, and it gives you the tools to be creative. So thank you, everyone. Enjoy your startup week. It's only Monday, so pace yourselves and have fun. Thank you.